the different data types that are available to us in Dart, as well as how to create functions. So the data types that we have are numbers, so this includes integers and booleans. Integers are whole valued numbers that could be positive or negative, while doubles are numbers that could have decimal places. Strings are for storing texts. Booleans are for true and false values. Lists is if you want to store more than one value of a particular data type. Sets are similar to lists, however, sets can only have unique items, so you cannot have any duplicates. Maps are key value pairs, and then null values are essentially a way to say that there is no value or a lack of a value. So let's look at each one of them. So if we want to create a number, we'll say int and then num is equals to 34. If we want to create a number with decimal places, we will use a double instead. So let's say we're storing the price of an item, we can say 4.5. Now we can also print them to the console. So if we say print num, this will print the first number here. Now if we want to add this to some sort of text, we can add it in a string. Now I'll try to add this double right here inside of a string. So I will do this. The price of a magazine is, and then I'll use a $sign, and then I'll say price, and then if I print this, it will say the price of a magazine is 4.5, and then we can say dollars or Canadian dollars. Now if we want to store a string in a variable, let's try to store this in 1. We will do string, and then let's say text equals to, and then use that string, and then now we can just print the text variable. And this should print the exact same thing. Next we'll look at booleans. So booleans can either be true or false. So if you want to say that something is correct or not, you can do this, and then you say true or false. Next we have lists. So let's say I want to store an array of numbers. Then I can say list of type integer, and then I'll call it numbers. And then here I'll just create an array of numbers or a list of numbers. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. If I want to access a particular item, I can use its index. So I can say print numbers at 0. So arrays and lists are, just as any other language or most of the languages, are 0 indexed. So first item is index 0, and then index 1, and so on. Now we can also, there's also helper methods for or helper properties for the first item and the last item. So you can say numbers.first, and numbers.last. If you want to get the length of this list, you can say numbers.length. Now let's look at two other collection items. So we have sets and maps. So sets are similar to lists, however the items inside are unique. So if I do set of type integer, I can say num set, and then to create a set you will use curly braces, and then you will say 1, 2, 3, 4. So sets are very useful because we can access or check if an item is in the set in constant time without having to go through every item in the set. To do something like that, we would do, say, numset dot contains and then 2, and then this should give us true or false. So you can see here when I did num set that contains 2, it will give us true. You can also add and remove items, so we can do num set dot add 5, num set dot remove 1, and so on. If you try to add a duplicate value, the items in the set will still be unique. So this value will it will see that the number 5 already exists, so it won't add it again. So here let's try to print num set. So as you can see, what we did here is we added a 5, and then we removed the 1, so the 1 doesn't exist anymore, and then we added another 5, but rather than being 2 5s, we only have 1 5, and then we printed the set. Last one we want to look at are maps. So maps are key value pairs. If we want to create a map, we can say we want to map from string to double, and then I'll say, for example, prices, and this will store an item and its price. So let's say a MacBook, which costs $2,500, and then we have an iPhone, which costs 1,400.56, for example. If I want to access the price of an item in the map, I can do print prices at, and then MacBook, for example. And then this will print the price of a MacBook is 2,500.32. Now another data type is the null data type, and this is essentially saying that there's a lack of value. So if you want to initialize a variable but you don't know the data that you want to store yet, you can set it to null to start with. So you can say, for example, var item equals to null, and then in the future you can say item is equals to 32, and then you can print item. So null, you can think of it as nothing or a lack of value. Now here we saw the var keyword. So let's look at the different ways that we can initialize variables. So we have var, dynamic, final, and const. So if you have, let's say, value is equals to hello, now with var, you are saying that we want to infer this data type. Now when you initialize a variable with var, if you try to reinitialize it, so if, for example, if you want to say value is equals to 1, let's try to do that, and then when we run, we should be getting an error. So using var, you cannot change the data type to be something else once you've already initialized it to a particular data type. So here you cannot change a string into an integer. Now another keyword we have is dynamic, and this is also saying that we want to infer a data type. However, with dynamic, you can change the data type of a variable. So as you can see here, there are no errors that occur. Lastly, we have final and const. So const is for storing immutable items. So for example, let's say numbers is equals to, so let's change numbers because we have numbers initialized at the top. So let's say constant nums, and then here I will say 1 2 3 4 or 5, and then let's try to add an item into constant nums dot add, and then 6. Now we should be getting an error here as well. So when you initialize something using a constant, meaning that this item or this value is immutable, and it's deeply immutable as well. So if you have a list of items, it means that this list cannot change. Essentially, when you create a const of a list, every item inside of it is also a const. Now, another way to do this is to use final. However, final, so let's say non-constant numbers, final will allow us to add items into the array. However, it will not allow us to reinitialize the non-constant nums. So if we comment this out, and then we say non-constant nums.add, and then we print non-constant nums, this should print the new list or new array with the value added to it. So essentially what constant is for storing variables that we know the value is during compile time, so before we even run the application. Final is for storing variables that we know will not be reinitialized. However, they could be variables or items that could be initialized during runtime. We will see when we will need to use const and when we need to use final. So the next thing we want to look at are functions. So I'll just remove all the code here and remove this. So this is what the function syntax is in Dart. So as you can see here, we have the return data type, and this says void, so meaning that this function does not return anything. And then you have the name of the function itself, and then you could pass in any arguments or parameters here. So in order to create our own function, we will give some sort of return data type. So we'll say int, and then I'll put the name of the function. So I'll say add, and it takes in two parameters. So we have integer a and integer b. And then this will return a plus b. And now here we can say integer sum is equals to add 1 and 2. And then if we print sum, this should print 3 to the screen. Now this is called positional arguments, which means that the order of the arguments that you're passing in matters. So the first argument will be passed in as the variable a, and then the second argument will be passed in as a variable b. Now we can also have named arguments. So if you wrap this in curly braces, and then here you can say required, and then required. And basically what this is saying that whenever you call the add function, you have to pass in a parameter or an argument with the name a, and then you have to pass in an argument with the name b. And then when you're actually calling the function, you would say a is equals to 1, and then b is equals to 2. Now what's nice about this is that the order doesn't matter. So if you have, let's say, 5 arguments, or let's say 10 arguments, then you don't have to worry about the order. And by referencing the arguments by name, it will be easier to use the function.